Testing 1, 2, 3. Hi everyone, and welcome to another Woke Wednesday. This podcast was created to shed light on different societal issues which have been at the forefront of public discourse through one of the most divisive times in American history. More so, it was created with the intent of allowing those who have often been neglected, shunned, or misunderstood to have a chance to share their experiences and thoughts. I hope that this dialogue encourages critical conversation and activism amongst all listeners, and I hope you'll tell all your friends about it and share on your social platforms. Now, let's get into some current events. Mississippi just signed into law one of the most strictest abortion bills to take effect in July. The heartbeat bill bans doctors from performing abortions after they can detect a fetal heartbeat during an ultrasound, unless the mother's health is at extreme risk. If you don't know, heartbeats can be detected as early as 6 weeks into a woman's pregnancy, which is literally before some women even know they're pregnant. Mississippi isn't the only state wanting to implement these abortion restrictions either. This year alone, 11 states, which include Texas, Florida, Georgia, Ohio, and Missouri, have all introduced heartbeat bills. The nationwide effort to limit access to abortion has been, without a doubt, propelled by conservative-dominated state legislators and an increasingly conservative Supreme Court. Kentucky's governor tried and failed to sign a measure like this into law, but a federal judge blocked the proposition, questioning its constitutionality. Religious groups have hoped that Mississippi's new law will prompt reconsideration of Roe v. Wade as a federal law, with the newfound ally and conservative Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh. Georgia's HB 481 bill was recently passed in the Senate, which will also ban abortions as soon as a heartbeat is detected. Brian Kemp, Georgia's governor, supports the bill and plans to sign it into law. I have so many thoughts and feelings about that man, but I'm not even going to go there. These regressive bills that are being written across our nation are meant to keep women's access to controlling what happens to our own bodies at extreme limitations. Women should have the innate right to seek an abortion for reasons she sees fit. Government institutions that are mostly comprised of men have no right to place constraints on women who need or want an abortion. I just don't understand. It's our bodies. We should be able to do with it how we see fit. Period.
Take my cotton, bitch.
Take my cotton, bitch.
Well, you're not using the right words.
Take my...
Do it, you won't. No balls. Wait, get a video of it.
Pick my cotton, nigger.
In other news, the University of Georgia's Tau Kappa Epsilon fraternity recently had a viral video circulate the internet of its members engaging in racial slurs and mocking the enslavement of African people. The boys verbatim said, "Pick my cotton, nigger." The National Fraternity responded with an apology on the iPhone Notes app, exclaiming their disgust by the remarks in the video and asserting that they have taken pride in their diversity since 1899. And honestly, y'all, I just find that really fucking wrong and inaccurate and all of the above. You cannot convince me that a predominantly white male fraternity has taken pride in its diversity since 1899. I don't know who the hell they're trying to fool, but it ain't me. Anyways, the UGA chapter has been currently suspended by the National Fraternity, and there's an investigation underway to find out who these students are. Students of all racial groups took to Twitter in response to the chapter only being suspended, and The official UGA Twitter responded almost 30 times to students' tweets with the same subpar message that UGA condemns racism in the strongest terms. Racism has no place on our campus. We will continue our efforts to promote a welcoming and supportive learning environment for our students, faculty, and staff. This worthless response does absolutely nothing to comfort the Black students that feel enraged and hurt by these words and the people that use them. If UGA really wants to comfort us, they need to fucking expel these students. Period. They responded to my Twitter, and y'all know, well, maybe y'all don't know, last year they had to have a little meeting about my tweets because UGA loves to stay neutral on these issues, even though they shouldn't be. It's really not that hard. If racism has no place on our campus, then they need to be expelled, just like those SAE members at OU were expelled. I'm not going to say I don't care about free speech, but it should be limited in this sense. There's no reason why these boys should have the opportunity to continue their education at the University of Georgia. They shouldn't have a job. They shouldn't have anything. They should just lead miserable lives because that's honestly what they deserve. They're also not going to stop hearing from me and other students until the appropriate consequences are given. I have already emailed multiple people, and I will continue to email, tweet, call, everything until they do something more than just kick these members out of their fraternity, because that really is doing nothing. And the fraternity was just suspended from campus, which means in a few years they'll be back and it'll just be fine and dandy. And it's also interesting that this was the same fraternity that had a gun go off, I think it was my freshman year, at a party, and the university really did nothing, but I digress. Lastly, the University of Georgia's response includes this idea of racism having no place on our campus when this school has a very clear and succinct response of how they feel about racism when old slave bones were found under Baldwin Hall, and the university did nothing to rectify the situation and allow students to continue exploring UGA's past concerning slave labor by at least memorializing these people. They also have yet to tear down all of the Confederate monuments across campus. I mean, y'all, there are literally so many fucking monuments, Confederate monuments across that campus. It's ridiculous. In my opinion, the university's failure to take swift action is because of a lack of accountability, transparency, and unwillingness to address the impact the school has had in terms of allowing racism to continue on campus and the school's historical implications with the racist culture. If you have not read the book on the desegregation of UGA, I highly recommend it because the shit is good. If you think I will not continue talking about this until something more is done, you're wrong. We have to hold these people accountable for their actions, period. In the midst of all this chaos, we're also seeing very apparently this idea of white fragility incorporated as well. With microaggressive racism still rampant and rooted in Southern white culture. If you want to know my thoughts more on that particular topic, I would encourage you to go listen to the white fragility episode because we are definitely seeing it just to a greater extent in this event. The state and the school has to be morally responsible to hold these individuals to a high standard by confronting racism in its modern evolution, being that our region has such a jaded and bigoted past concerning how we treat minorities. Period. They need to be held accountable. The state cannot let these boys get away with this. They can't. I could literally talk about this for hours, but now on to this week's episode. I've recently been out of work the past few days because of a chemical fire that occurred at a petrochemical plant near my job. Because of the hazardous materials that have seeped into the air, the area had a shelter-in-place implemented for several days, and surrounding schools were canceled. In the midst of all this, I got to thinking, What's the likelihood that a chemical plant would result in seeping toxic gases into a more affluent white neighborhood? Well, in my opinion, and according to the facts, it's nowhere near as likely to happen. That's why I've decided to focus on the concept of environmental racism and how it's impacted communities of colors.
The columns of black smoke coming out of a petrochemical storage facility in Houston are so dense that many people living in the area say they're concerned with the air quality they're breathing.
People need to be able to access information in a way that they can understand and they can take action to protect their health.
A large fire began on March 17 at the International Terminals Company.
How long will this last? We talked about that fuel has burned off, and we've said from the beginning that may be what has to happen.
Firefighting efforts managed to extinguish the flames 4 days later. But during those critical hours, the flames destroyed several large tanks that contained gasoline and chemicals used in nail polish remover, glues, and paint thinner. Authorities tried to reassure the public that the air quality was safe, but on March 21, a shelter-in-place order was issued for a few hours. Several school districts remain closed.
Fortunately, we are picking up high benzene levels throughout the community of Deer Park. They're just slightly elevated. We believe that this is happening because of the changes in the wind condition overnight. The winds have shifted quite a bit.
State authorities have conducted air quality tests and found no levels of hazardous concentrations in the Houston area. But some residents who live near the storage facility said they don't have confidence in the air quality test results.
You might be wondering, the environment isn't a person, so it can't be racist. Well, obviously. However, our most basic necessities, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, are all controlled by people. And as we know, people can be racist.
Nationally, the facilities where we dump our garbage and process dangerous chemicals tend to be located in poor and minority communities. The people who live there have little or no protection from the industries around them, and things could get worse. So there's this idea of environmental justice. It's pretty simple. Communities shouldn't be forced to deal with more pollution because they belong to a certain race, national origin, or income bracket. Yet America has struggled over the years to implement any serious policy that actually protects these communities. So let's lay out the ways the government has failed them.
We will not allow Warren County to become a dump site.
The fight for environmental justice took off in 1982, when residents of Warren County, North Carolina mounted mass demonstrations against a plan to dump contaminated soil in a landfill in their community. The EPA investigated 4 similar landfills in southern states and found that they were all located in Black or low-income neighborhoods. In 1987, the United Church of Christ Racial Justice Commission found that around the country, hazardous waste facilities were more likely to be located in mostly minority communities. Amid mounting proof, the federal government was forced to act.
George Herbert Walker Bush.
So in 1992, President George H.W. Bush founded the Office of Environmental Justice inside the EPA. 2 years later, President Bill Clinton signed an executive order requiring federal agencies to consider environmental justice in all of their policies, as well as extending civil rights protection to environmental discrimination. But Congress never passed a bill to make Clinton's executive order law. Then came George W. Bush. His administration shifted the focus of the Office of Environmental Justice from protecting low-income and minority communities to all people, leaving vulnerable populations without a federal environmental advocate.
80% of New Orleans, including much of downtown, is underwater.
Under Bush, many environmental civil rights claims were rejected or delayed for years. In 2009, after President Barack Obama's election, his administration recommitted to environmental justice.
Generally speaking, in this country, a lot of environmentally problematic facilities tend to be located in places where poor folks live.
Yet, during the 2 years Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House, they didn't file a single bill focused on strengthening environmental justice protections. Passing major environmental legislation faded further when Republicans took control of Congress in the 2010 midterm elections. Now, President Donald J. Trump is making good on his vow to weaken the EPA.
Environmental protection, what they do is a disgrace. Every week they come out with new regulations. They're making it impossible.
Who's going to protect the environment?
We'll be fine with the environment. We can leave a little bit.
This budget, a 31% cut to the EPA, $2.6 billion cut away from the EPA. That's what the president wants.
As the EPA loses funding and regulations are rolled back, vulnerable communities may very likely fall through the cracks.
I also want to point out the intersection of classism within this topic because impoverished communities of color are hit the hardest by this phenomenon, and all while some might counter-argue that class is the sole reason environmental racism exists, the evidence points to it that race and class are factors that contribute to this issue. Obviously, pollution is almost everywhere. However, communities of color are disproportionately affected by facilities that fill the air, soil, and water with contaminants. Industrial polluters such as landfills, trash incinerators, coal plants, and toxic waste dumps affect the well-being of residents. It also doesn't help that a lack of accessibility to healthy foods in these neighborhoods accelerate health risks, i.e. food deserts, or the expense it takes to actually be healthy versus how much it costs to eat poorly. The food industry, with their factory farms and slaughterhouses, are disproportionately located in impoverished communities of color. Residents who have lived near these factory farms have often complained about increased irritation to their eyes, throats, and noses, and their overall quality of life has declined and resulted in an increase in depression and fatigue for some. These aren't just isolated incidents either. The companies that choose to bring their businesses to these neighborhoods do so strategically because the land in which they're inhabiting is typically cheaper because it's a poorer area. They also recognize the political ties embedded in placing their plants in these locations. Typically, these residents don't have the political means to fight against these companies moving into their areas. Not only that, because they're placed in high poverty areas, those living there typically need the jobs that these industries are bringing in. So, they're less likely to complain. To be exact, more than half of all people who live close to hazardous waste sites are people of color. Floodplains have high populations of Black people and Latinx people. Black children are 2 times as likely to suffer from lead poisoning than white children. Black and Latino children also have the highest rates of asthma than any other racial demographics. Some more concrete examples are Louisiana's Cancer Alley is an 85-mile stretch across the Mississippi River that's also home to over 200 petrochemical plants and a high rate of cancer among its Black residents.
The images of the water are shocking enough.
Would you drink that? People have dumped in this river forever. It's like we're in a cesspool.
My tub, you should see it, it's brown.
And then come the headlines. An American city failed to provide basic protections to its citizens, and now the children of Flint have much higher than normal levels of lead in their blood. Rick Snyder, governor of Michigan, has apologized.
I am sorry, and I will fix it.
President Obama declared a national emergency.
You can't shortchange basic services that we provide to our people.
And now 2016 presidential candidates are starting to weigh in.
The governor of that state acted as though he didn't really care.
Lead poisoning is terrible and terrifying. No amount of exposure is safe. And there's evidence that years after we got it out of paint, gas, and more, it contributed to a drastic drop in crime in the 90s. The city has switched back to cleaner water, but the effects will last decades. We take clean water for granted. How could this possibly happen in 2016? Well, you've got to rewind to 2011. Flint was broke. It had lost about half its population after the car factories closed. It had $1.1 billion in unfunded pension costs. It had to cut half its police force. Michigan had a solution, called emergency managers.
Now he's been appointed by the governor to turn around Flint's finances. Mike, welcome.
These managers can make cost-cutting measures without the normal political procedure.
I think what we have to do is look at the expense side first. There could be services that we can no longer provide in the city.
And they decided the city could save money on water. Flint would stop buying water from Detroit and join a new regional water system. And as a temporary measure, Flint would use water from the Flint River. The switch happened in 2014.
Here's the Flint.
And who decided to do this exactly is under intense debate. But regardless of blame, the story gets worse. Residents saw and tasted the dirty water and started complaining.
Water's brown, has a bad odor. I'm afraid to even feed it to my cat or my dogs.
We should not have to pay for the water. It's nasty.
But the city claimed federal tests showed the water was safe. An employee at the Environmental Protection Agency leaked a Michigan report to a local activist, which showed the water had higher than normal lead levels. The city's response? Flint told the woman the lead came from her plumbing. It took an outside investigation by Virginia Tech researchers that found elevated lead levels in the water for the state to admit there was a problem in September 2015.
So the corrosion's eating up the pipes, it's eating up the iron pipes, it's causing main breaks, it's causing discolored water, and about 20% of the homes there's just too much lead.
In October 2015, the government bought water filters for its citizens and switched back to water from Detroit. Before all this, 2.1% of the city's children had high blood lead levels. After, it was 4%. For kids under 5 in the most affected zip codes, it was 6.3%. Why did Flint poison its citizenry? Under emergency managers from the state, it wanted to save money. To start to reverse the effects will cost dearly. Just switching back to Detroit's water cost $12 million. A class action lawsuit against the city is pending.
Flint, Michigan is a classic case of environmental racism, being that the state of Michigan wanted to save money by switching their drinking water supply from Detroit's system to Flint Rivers. But inadequate treating and testing of the water resulted in lead poisoning of residents' water pipes. Yet, city officials continuously ignored residents' complaints, claiming that the water was safe and usable, although it was literally fucking brown. Not only that, the city switch in which they've received their water resulted in an outbreak of a disease that's a form of pneumonia that ended up killing 12 people and made approximately 87 sick. Residents in Flint took the state to court, and they won. But did they all receive new lead-free pipes? No. Instead, they received door-to-door water bottle delivery service. I literally wish I was joking about that. That is honestly how some people still to this day depend on water. This all began in 2014. It's now 2019, and some residents in Flint still lack clean water.
After months of protests from Native Americans and environmental activists, construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline will stop.
It's a tremendous victory for Standing Rock, for the Aceti-Shakowee, for the countless tribal nations, indigenous communities, and millions of Americans and people across the world who hit the streets in support of Standing Rock.
The company building the pipeline was waiting for a permit on the very last section, which would have crossed the Missouri River just north of the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. Instead of granting the permit, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers says it will find an alternate route for the pipeline. For months, Native Americans and environmental activists have protested, arguing the pipeline poses an environmental hazard.
The Missouri River is the only water supply for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. That gets contaminated. They don't have a water supply.
The company building the pipeline said it would be safer than sending oil via trucks or trains.
This pipeline is being built to safety standards that far exceed what the government requires us to do.
With the increase in U.S. oil production, oil pipeline leaks are up 60% since 2009.
Sunoco Logistics spills more crude than any of its competitors, 200 oil leaks in the last 6 years. Doesn't that safety record indicate that the concerns of the Standing Rock tribe ought to be listened to?
The
The tribe also claimed construction had already disrupted some of their sacred sites and burial grounds.
We have a sworn declaration from one of the tribe's cultural experts that describes some of these sites, multiple grave sites and burials. We put all that in front of the court, and the next morning it was gone. They took that information and bulldozed the entire site.
The law tries to keep this exact thing from happening through a process called consultation.
Anytime there's a project on federal lands, American Indian governments have the right to consult with the United States agencies before those projects go forward.
The tribe says this consultation didn't happen the way it was supposed to. And for months, they've been occupying land that's owned by the pipeline company, but which the tribe says belongs to them. And county law enforcement officials have been aggressively trying to get them to leave. The CEO of the company building the pipeline had hoped that President-elect Donald Trump could push the project through. And though Trump says he supports the pipeline, he'd have to go through the courts to reverse this decision from the Army Corps, which means, for now, the tribe's water source is safe.
Another classic case in regards to environmental racism is the resistance of Standing Rock Sioux to the Dakota Access Pipeline. The Dakota Access Pipeline is 1,772 miles pipeline used for transporting crude oil from North Dakota to different refineries. Of course, because America is built on capitalism and profit, the company's investors wanted to profit more and sought an alternative transportation system of the oil. That transportation system was the Dakota Access Pipeline. They claimed the pipeline would definitely uphold regulation standards, create jobs, and lessen the environmental risk of oil transportation. Those protesting argued the environmental risk in terms of water quality decreasing and cultural heritage of the Lakota and Dakota peoples of the Standing Rock Sioux. The land they wanted this pipeline to be on constitutionally belonged to the Standing Rock Sioux. Protesters took to Standing Rock by literally camping out on the land in order to prevent the pipeline's building. They endured violence ranging from being pepper sprayed, shot with rubber bullets, were attacked by dogs, and denied nourishment. Ultimately, the camps had to be evacuated and protesters were forcibly removed. Trump then signed executive orders to allow the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline and Keystone Pipeline, which was surprisingly backed by Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, despite being described as a staunch progressive. Ultimately, these incidents that we see in our mainstream culture are in no way an accident or a coincidence. Government agencies and private corporations know exactly what they're doing as they're maintaining these businesses in these marginalized communities. We have to actively resist these measures by pushing for the new Green Deal, which will move the U.S. away from oil and cut carbon emissions altogether. We also have to actively protest the continual building of harmful, pollutant-friendly businesses from moving into these areas and educate residents on how they can resist these companies from coming into their areas. As a globalized modern society, there is no reason why humans shouldn't have clean air, high quality water, and access to healthy foods. Period. There's no reason in 2019 that there are Americans that don't have clean water, high quality food, or high quality air to breathe in. I hope that this episode was informative and thought-provoking for all that listen and for those that will listen in the future. I hope that we all recognize the very urgent need of supplying all our inhabitants of our communities with access to good air, food, and water. I hope that we actively resist capitalistic and environmentally detrimental companies from moving into our spaces and infringing on our basic human access to water, food, and air. We also have to begin pursuing justice against these companies that have allowed their resources to greatly sicken people and even kill more. There is no good reason why we, as one of the most advanced countries in the world, should have anyone living here go even one day without access to basic human necessities. Remember, all of these opinions are my own, but they should be everyone else's. Have a woke Wednesday. Thank you for another Woke Wednesday. Transcripts of entire episodes will be available on the Woke Wednesday website. Episodes are written and produced by Hannah Mason and Trey Leonard of Linico Entertainment. Episodes are hosted by Hannah Mason and edited by Trey Leonard. All graphics are designed by Anna French,